When it comes to difficult circumstances, we've all heard the platitudes. No pain, no gain. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But if we spend our lives trying to be the strong one, we become exhausted, burned out, and disconnected from our truest selves. What if it were different? Could there be a different way to be strong? Could strength mean more than pushing on and pushing through the pain, bearing every heavy burden on our own? What if instead true strength were more like the tide? Soft and bold, fierce and gentle, moving together as one powerful force. Well, that's where we're headed today. I'm Jem Fadling, and it's time for I Can Do That. While I'm sharing just a portion of my conversation with Aundi Kolber today, you can watch the entire conversation inside Replenish. We would love for you to join us in our online coaching and community for women. You can go to unhurriedliving.com/replenish to learn more. Let's dig in. In Strong Like Water, author and trauma therapist Aundi Kolber offers a framework for true flourishing. With each page, you'll learn how your nervous system shapes your experience so that we can move through pain instead of being stuck in it. You'll explore various practices, rhythms, and resources to support you in challenging circumstances with compassion and hope. Discover how to internalize connection, love, and safety, empowering you with greater resilience. A different, more expansive way of healing, wholeness, and possibly, especially, strength is possible. We were made to be strong like water. Here's a little bit about Aundi. Aundi Kolber is a licensed professional counselor and author of the critically acclaimed Try Softer. She has received additional training in her specialization of trauma and body-centered therapies and is passionate about the integration of faith and psychology. Aundi regularly speaks at local and national events, and as a survivor of trauma, Aundi brings hard-won knowledge about the work of change, the power of redemption, and the beauty of experiencing God with us in our pain. Enjoy my conversation with Aundi. What is the flow of strength? And you talk about situational, transitional, and integrated strength. And I know that's a part, but talk to us about that whole process.
Yeah. So one of the really big concepts that I introduce and sort of have coined in this book is something called the flow of strength. And this is the way, just like what you named, those three types of strength. It is sort of how I theorize the ways that we adapt. And so essentially, like with that situational strength, I imagine it to be the kind of strength that we present with when our bodies really interpret that we are in a place of significant danger. Meaning, we'll talk about this with the window of tolerance just a little bit too. But essentially what that means is our body is really living fully from survival energy, fully from that lower part of the brain. And because that's true, there's like the recognition that there's, on one hand, that is important because there are experiences, instances, even chronic experiences wherein we really need to be able to react from a place of survival because it allows us to tap into things that are not available to us when we're kind of like relaxed and just like, like, hey, whatever happens, happens, So there's value to that situational strength. And I think that the hard thing is that we also then don't have the resources of our full brain and body. And so as our body begins to experience cues of safety, which I talk about through the lens of what I call compassionate resourcing, that I really match this idea of compassionate resourcing Really, especially because of the work of Dr. Ariel Schwartz has done some really beautiful work about explaining resourcing as being anything that communicates safety to our body in the present moment. And so what's interesting is that as our body begins to interpret cues of safety, we intuitively begin to move towards what I call transitional strength. And that transitional strength is when this is, you speak about using that idea of and. And I think of transitional strength very much as the place where we are able to be with both. Like our prefrontal cortex is beginning to come back online. So this is important because that integrates the rest of our brain. But what that means is that our lower parts of our brain, like we might be able to begin to notice like, oh, I'm really activated, or I'm scared, I'm afraid, I'm angry, I want to get out of here, this person feels unsafe. We might begin to notice that, but we're doing it from a place where we're not just reacting. We're able to, what Dan Siegel calls, think about thinking.
Yeah.
This matters because this is where we begin to have some choice. This is where we begin to be able to say, what do I need right now? What are the resources available to me? What boundaries might I need to set? What kind of internal work can I do to build safety? And so this transitional strength is very much in this place where it's not that the original pain or disturbance is gone. It's that we're able to be with it. We're able to attend to it. And then in this flow of strength, I theorize it as our body gets enough safety, we are able to metabolize whatever caused that original sense of like disturbance or fear or terror. And as that happens, we move towards integrative strength. And integrative strength is really where it's not a finish line, but it's almost like when you think about the phrasing like a stress cycle, like something happened, you were really afraid, your body was able to process it all the way through, and you feel calm again, and you feel like it's over. That's a sense of like your body went all the way through the flow. And so integrative strength and this whole process, in some ways, I think of it even like a circle. So for some folks, they might go through the circle a couple times a day. Like that's normal. Or if you are someone with a history of unresolved trauma, you might be spending more time in like situational strength and transitional strength. So maybe you don't have the resources yet to all the way metabolize it. And that's okay. That's actually pretty common for many people with trauma. But if we can begin to I love this framework because I think it helps us say, well, what else would I need?
Yes.
Who else can I invite to be part of my process? What other things allow me to build safety both internally and externally?
Yes.
And as I do that, this beautiful, magnificent design of our bodies is that we can move through hard things.
Oh, so beautifully said. I love that each one of them is called strength, situational strength, right? We did what we had to do at the time to protect, to survive. And transitional strength. A lot of times people think that middle spot is not a valid place. I need to get to whatever the thing is as soon as I can. But the transition, the middle part, the in between is strength as well. We're learning, right? We're bringing on new things. And then integrated strength. Each one of them is a valid place to be in the process. And like you said, we're cycling anyway.
Yep.
And probably cycling differently in maybe different areas of our life, depending on where we're.
Absolutely. There's so many different, like there's like threads that I think about, and not everything's going to bring up situational strength, right? So some things, sometimes people are going to just come because let's say you have had a history where you've had enough support. You have a sense of there's enough safety present. even when something hard happens, you may just go right into transitional strength. Like, this is hard, and I can be with myself, and I can stay with myself.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that the situational strength is not valid,
Right.
because for those of us, and this is very much part of my story, when we have a lot of unresolved trauma, when we've had a lot of experiences where our body has felt deeply unsafe and interpreted that as life or death, what happens is that in the present, when we get cues that remind us, like, even if it's maybe from the outside, people are like, well, that's a different situation. If your body perceives that they are similar in almost any way,
Yeah.
and it could be the look on the person's face, it could be the smell that was the same, it could be just the sense of the location where the sensation of the emotion came up in your body was so similar to X. This is how our body collects information. And there is a wisdom to that, because essentially the body is saying, this has been unsafe before. And because it's been unsafe before, the best way to keep you safe is to keep you as far away from the things that are similar to that which has already been unsafe. And that will activate the situational strength. And so healing, the work of healing, in many ways, is not necessarily that you don't go to situational strength. In fact, I would argue, if we are cut off from our situational strength, that is really unhelpful. Because if it is appropriate, because what is in front of you truly is that dangerous, then that is potentially where you actually need to go. So healing is actually more about our body being able to accurately perceive what nervous system state we need to be in based off of the context we are in. And so if we are safe and we feel safe, boom, like, that is what we want. If we are unsafe and we are sort of bypassing the information to sort of be like, well, yeah, like, this person has all these red flags, but everything's fine, I'm totally fine. That's not helpful. Our body's giving us information. And so it may be that we can say, safety actually comes from being able to say to the information in our body, I'm listening. I hear you. I know this reminds me of this situation that's happened in the past. Let's get more information. Let's make sure we have good boundaries. Let's make sure we have all these resources available, because I am picking something up and I can bring wisdom. And that's the resource.
Yeah. As you're saying this, I mean, so many things have come to mind, trying to decide which. So good. I mean, first of all, tying in our brand of unhurried living, which we believe is, God has given me all the time I need for the most important things in my life, things and people, right? It's not just being slow, it's unhurried enough. And I'm hearing you say, I can give myself permission to pause and notice and assess where I am and ask the questions and get the help I need for wherever I am. And that takes a kind of attention, doesn't it? And effort. And so maybe, again, encourage us here, if this is a newer idea, to pause and to really care. This is because this is very specific and very intense. And sometimes this is humming along in the background while we're just living our life and we're not aware. I mean, how would you encourage us to become more capable of waking up to what's occurring and assessing and allowing, like what you're describing? Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. And truly, I think what I would say is a couple of things. The first is that if you are new to any of these concepts, like, it's like, what does that even mean to not be in crisis mode all the time? First, I just want to say, I hear you. I hear you. That's not shameful. And what that might be telling us is that your body does not have enough safety. I mean, just from a very clear starting place, this is what is being communicated. And the lack of safety might be like, uh, it might be based partially in the past. It might be based solely in the past. It might be based on a combination of like in this present moment, like it doesn't feel safe to disappoint these people, or there's like all this information, there's these relational dynamics, or there's just actual things that tell me I can't not be in crisis mode. The thing I would just want to say is that the key here is that we look to build cues of safety. Now, cues of safety, I know for folks who haven't experienced that can feel like confusing. Yeah. And so what I might just say is first questioning and getting curious about things like, are there any places in your life? Like in the book, how I talk about, I go to the ocean, and that is actually a resource to me. I feel regulated by the rhythm of the waves. But are there spaces in your life that you can connect with more, that allow your body, even briefly, to begin to settle, is sort of how I think of it. Maybe you wouldn't use the word safe, but you feel a little bit more like yourself. In that process, I talk a lot about things like grounding. Grounding is using our five senses to really get present to the moment. But like that would be a great example of, even if you're just having a really hard day, getting outside and using your five senses is a great place to start. But in the big picture, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build almost like a tool belt, right? If you think about your resources, it's like we need maybe more than just one. So we might build on like, okay, here's a place I feel really safe. Here's a person that I feel like I can be safe with. Here's an activity, that it like actually connects to something that allows my body to settle. And what we're trying to do is build enough safety so we can turn inward. Mm-hmm. And in the long game is we're going to learn to take the outward safety. And what's so cool is that it will begin to live internally too. And that's something, it's like we can't rush it. Everybody sort of has their own timeline. But often we need to experience that. Like, for example, in a mentorship or a therapeutic relationship, we experience sort of a relational withness that helps to reorganize the templates in our body. And that internal template is the thing that helps us learn to be with ourselves, so that when the pain does come up, we have the ability to say, oh, I see that you're hurting. What do you need? How can I help? Like, what would be a resource to you right now? And that it's like all of these things. And I talk about this a lot in Strong Like Water, that there are so many tools and resources. And part of it is really about building trust and building safety. And those things, there's things we can do in the short term, and there's things that we can do for the long game too.
Yeah. Well, jumping off of the word safety that you just brought up, we'll come back. I do want to come back because you talk about the window of tolerance and the flow of strength, and maybe you can tell me which would be better. You just mentioned safety. Should we jump to safety and come back, or do you think it's better to continue on with this, the overlap of the window of tolerance and the flow of safety? Or flow of strength, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it's what I will just add about, because really the window of tolerance, I think fits really nicely with a flow of strength. And it really works well with safety too, because essentially the window of tolerance, for folks who may not be familiar with this, is a range of arousal that each person has, no matter your history or your story. And it can shift a little bit based off of what you're experiencing, your health, like your exhaustion, all that kind of stuff. But it's a range in which we can feel our feelings, and we can sort of stay integrated in our sort of our brain and our body before we go into either that fight, flight, potentially fawn, or we may go down into sort of like a dissociation, a numbness, a depression. And so this is really important with the flow of strength, because when we talk about that situational strength, part of what I'm saying is that anything outside of the window is situational strength, essentially. So when we go into sort of a sense of anything that's like our sympathetic nervous system's going on, or our parasympathetic, like the dorsal vagal, which is that more the dissociative, either of those, that's situational strength. And that situational strength is that lower part of the brain. And so that's where it can be helpful to understand that we really have less of ourselves available. It is a narrow perspective of strength. And that's why I think in our culture too, like we so often praise people for going above and beyond, and we don't recognize, oh, that person is in like a trauma response. They didn't have a choice. And we can honor why they needed to do that without simply patting them on the back. Perhaps the question is what would they need now? What do they need? What's the repair? In a way, that's what, when we talk about safety, another way to talk about safety is that we are repairing. If we had to go to situational strength, it's because your body experienced a rupture of safety. So the cue, the resource of safety is the attempt and the work to say, how do we match? How do we lovingly meet what just happened? And there's so many different contexts, right? This can happen spiritually. This can happen in our bodies. This can happen, relationally. It can happen interpersonally. It can happen racially. It can happen sexually. There are lots of ways that we experience ruptures of safety. And the healing comes as our body, not just cognitively, begins to recognize that there's safety, but in an embodied way is able to take in the safety.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything you're saying is just, I have lived what you're saying. I can, I'm old enough to have had a few times around the trees. But I guess as a testimony, I would say that, yes, it is a long process and there are many moving pieces. My own walk with God. I have a spiritual director. I had some in-depth therapy for years. And all of what you're saying was all a part of that. At the time, it's interesting, everyone's talking in this vocabulary now more broadly. And I didn't know anything about the nervous system. I just knew that I was being healed in these sessions because he wasn't really doing that whole thing. But what I'm trying to say is the process is real. If you stay hopeful enough and moving forward one at a time, whatever that is, there is healing that comes. And I'm starting to recognize, even as you're describing all these things, the ways in which I still have situational. I go big. I don't tend to go dorsal. I tend to go like this. I don't know why. It's what I do.
Yeah, it's valid.
And I'm beginning to recognize when I'm out there now. And I didn't have that vocabulary before, like, oh, I see what I'm doing. And this is my hand motion for what happens. And I can tell I'm out here. And then I do whatever work I've learned to bring myself back to that, that middle space.
Yeah.
But it's still a challenge. I still have to remain awake to what's going on. And by the grace of God, I'm making my way. And I know the women who are listening are as well. Yeah. And I so appreciate how you're describing all of this. You're giving us vocabulary. You're giving us permission to accept every part, to work within every part, and to know, though, that there is a flow. So I love all of that. So is there anything else about safety that you would want to say to us? You say in the book, telling our bodies we are safe and feeling safe are two very different things. Is there anything more you would want to say about that?
I think the thing I would just say for folks, for women especially, and well, really anyone who is listening, that just to amplify that message of, like, I think the thing I feel a lot in the folks I observe is that we can't shame ourselves into safety.
Right.
And it's like, I think so often we so desperately want to be quote unquote finished that it's
Right.
like, if I just tell myself again enough, that maybe it'll just sort of sink in, you know? And I would just say, even though I think we can honor why we feel that way, I get it. I get it. And I think there's a lot of pressure in our culture, in even church spaces, and to sort of have this finishedness. And for me, I think on two levels. One is that it actually is counter to the work of healing. It really is. And I say that not to make, to like, I hope it feels like freedom to say that, that as we, like in the book, I have a prayer for honoring, and I was inspired by Father Thomas Keating, his welcoming prayer. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I have found sometimes folks are not even ready to welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think of as even a precursor is just to honor,
Mm-hmm.
is to see you. That's where you are. And so for me, even with shame, we can say, I see, like, I honor the desire that's coming up to be finished and even to want to get to safety. And might it be possible just to acknowledge the reality of where I am, and that in that it softens us. And it is the softening that is the resource. As we honor our body, as because shame in a way is actually trying to protect us right there. And so as it softens, it gives way to what might be possible in terms of connecting with that which could actually truly transform us.
Yeah. Yeah. In Try Softer, you talked about white knuckling. And that comes back to my mind often, that whether I go big or if I'm grasping, it feels like a similar sensation. And I can picture
Mm,
myself just loosening, you talk, softening, right?
yes.
Loosening that grip. And I love the words honor. Just honor and
Mm,
respect what's happening right now. We don't have to
yeah.
condone it or
Mhm,
live there, but minimally, can we honor it? I love that terminology. I use that a lot as well when I
mm,
talk with women. There's so much grace to be applied in so many ways, and it's so
mhm.
easy to not be gracious with ourselves. Here's your I can do that for this week. Ponder or journal on this. What most stood out to you today as Aundi shared with us? What does being strong like water mean to you? And what difference might that make in your life today? Remember, you're making your way forward one small, simple, and gracious step at a time.